Hey everyone, Miss Larson here. I'm going to read to you from the ACLU, or American Civil Liberties Union in the state of Virginia, about the shameful history of eugenics in Virginia. You might not have heard of eugenics, but eugenics is basically when the government or some organization that is supported by the government um, eliminates people's ability to have children because they say that those people had some sort of genetic condition that made them less worthy of being able to have children. So they say that they're feeble minded, which means not able to make good decisions for themselves. And so they forcefully take away their ability to actually have children. That's called eugenics. The idea behind it was originally that you could make society better if people who had like learning disabilities, for example, were eliminated from society. But guys, that's not something that you can control like that, and that's not true science, and it is not an acceptable thing. So I want to read to you about what happened, and so you can understand and learn about it. It is kind of a shameful part of Virginia history, but it is a part that happened, and it is worthwhile for us to study it so that something like this doesn't happen again in the future. So, one of the less well known episodes in Virginia history is the practice of forced sterilization, begun during the heyday of the eugenics movement in the early 20th century, a Virginia based movement that sought to protect the purity of the American race. Virginia's legal sterilization program was enacted into law in 1924. The same year, the legislature adopted the Racial Integrity Act that prohibited interracial marriages. Guys, this stuff is less than 100 years old. It's kind of crazy to me to think that's less than 100 years ago, but it is. Virginia's Eugenical Sterilization Act of 1924 became the model for the nation after it survived constitutional review by the U.S. Supreme Court in Buck v. Bell, which was a court case where the U.S. Supreme Court said that, yeah, it's okay to take away people's right to have children if they're deemed to be feeble-minded. The High Court ruled that the state's law allowing forced sterilization of any patient afflicted with hereditary forms of insanity, imbecility, etc., from the greater welfare of society did not violate the 14th Amendment's guarantee to due process and equal protection under the law. As a result of the ruling, sterilization rates increased, and the categories of people that qualified for sterilization were gradually broadened to include criminals. Tragically, it is estimated that between 7,200 and 8,300 people were sterilized in Virginia from 1927 to 1979 because they were deemed by society at the time to be unworthy or unfit to procreate or have children. In most cases, the individuals were patients in state mental institutions who were sent there because of alleged mental illness, physical deformity, or feeble-mindedness, or simply because they were homeless. 22% of the individuals sterilized there were African Americans, about equal to the population in the state at the time. The two-thirds of the people sterilized were women. Many of those sterilized were not even told that they were being sterilized, but instead given some other explanation for their operation. In hindsight, it is hard to fathom how the U.S. Supreme Court could have approved this program or how Virginians could have allowed this program to go on for so long, longer than any other state. Yet, at the time, it was widely believed that the government's control over procreation could cure society's ills, specifically poverty and mental illness. Additionally, incomplete and faulty science led people to believe that those they were sterilizing were feeble-minded by heredity or genetics, when in fact they were not. It is in an effort to overturn Buck v. Bell, the ACLU filed a class action lawsuit against Virginia in December of 1980, naming 4 victims of the state's involuntary sterilization program. The ACLU sought to have the court declare that sterilization program violated the victims' constitutional rights and prohibit further sterilizations without informed consent. It also sought to compel the state to notify all patients that they had been sterilized and to provide mental and psychological assistance at state expense. The case was ultimately settled in 1985, with the Commonwealth agreeing to launch a media campaign to inform victims of their sterilization and to provide counseling services for the victims. Fast forward nearly 2 decades, and on the 75th anniversary of Buck, Then Governor Mark Warner issued a formal apology for Virginia's participation in the eugenics movement. And last year, marking the 85th anniversary, Delegate Patrick Hope called on Virginia to pay reparations to sterilization victims. This year, he has proposed a bill establishing a fund to compensate the victims, House Bill 1529, a bill co-sponsored by Delegate Bob Marshall. We wholeheartedly support the effort to compensate victims of the state's forced sterilization law and hope that, as a society, we can learn from our past so as to not repeat our mistakes. Remember, the 14th Amendment of the Constitution says no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of the law, nor deny to any person within this jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. And so the argument here is that eugenics, which from an ethical standpoint, to me, is wrong because it took away people's rights to have children and ability to have children just because somebody said that they were feeble-minded, which could just have meant that they were poor, could have meant that they had a learning disability for any reason, took away their rights to have children, and that does not follow the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. Thanks for listening.